So our first session talked about the why, and I think the why led us to all the pieces that inequality has sort of been leading into in the last little while, which is what is the case for resiliency for the builder community? What does it look like? What are the partnerships you need to make that work? And then, as was sort of talked about in the first session, like, is there a labeling opportunity? Is there a training opportunity? What does that knowledge gap look like? How do you move those things forward? And at Inequality, our network is a network of high-performance builders. You've already invested in training and education to become certified and deliver those labeled homes. So we know you're already invested in that. So that's all about why we find ourselves in this position, why we're making resiliency the theme of the day. And we take a business approach to these conversations. I know Stephanie Coleman talked about the academic process, right? We take the business approach. And the most reasonable business approach to move these things forward is a pilot, right? Bringing people together, expertise, working together. And that's really what we're talking about in this session is Inequality has decided to dive into a pilot opportunity. We brought in a great builder in Farsight Homes to talk about what the opportunity looks like. And we don't do that by ourselves. We are completely taking advantage of the work of the Institute of Catastrophic Loss Reduction and CHPA's Resilient Task Force. Together, they published a resiliency checklist. And so now we're connecting that work into our network of high-performance builders and putting resiliency into action with Farsight's commitment to building a discovery home that combines a net zero design with the resiliency features. So this is a pilot that we're moving forward on. I'm going to hand the floor over to Kevin from Farsight Home to talk about the decisions they're making through the process. The IDP sort of sets up a list of options for the builder to consider. And our approach at Inequality is the builder is going to make the call. What works for them in terms of integrating resiliency features into an existing net zero design? It is that natural, we feel that natural blend between energy efficiency, high performance construction, and a resilience opportunity. So Kevin, over to you.
Thank you very much, Joe. Pleasure to be here with everyone today. And in order to really set up this conversation, I want to take a brief moment to actually take a step back and highlight some of the things that were just talked about in that video. Farsight Homes has been committed to building better than code homes for many, many years now. And that's where our journey really started. As we saw building code pushing towards energy efficiency and the roadmap to come, we started to really plan out how we can get ahead and how can we achieve some of these things so that when code does change, our setup, our homes have already met those targets, and it makes ease of construction that much easier in the field. So we started many, many years ago with Energy Star, building better than code homes, really working from an outside-in approach, working towards getting our homes air sealed with Tyvek and air barrier, making sure we have really good secondary planes of protection. And it was when we started looking at the house from an outside-in approach, we weren't necessarily looking at it from a resiliency standpoint, but it was always coming back to peace of mind. We're a small family builder. We like to believe that our buyers are going to live in our homes for decades and generations. And often for us, our best marketing tool is word of mouth, repeat buyers, family and friends recommending us. So when we start looking at those principles, we start looking at what do we want to build in a home that we would be proud to sell, but we would also be proud to live in ourselves. And the first aspect of resiliency that we actually implemented without actually thinking of it as resiliency was a synthetic roof underlay on all our homes. This was something for just peace of mind. We know as builders, we often have to put the shingles on the roof in not ideal conditions, and you can get tabs that blow off. But we also have to warranty that roof for 2 years. So there's always opportunities where our after-sales service team is going to have to go in and make it a repair, or even the homeowner after the fact that underlay gives them peace of mind that in the event something happens, they are protected from secondary damage from water. They have time to get a contractor in and make that fix. So everything always came back to peace of mind. What can we do for energy efficiency? What can we do for resiliency that brings peace of mind to us as a builder, but also to our buyers? So the home that we decided to do was actually a consequence, if you want to call it that, of the slow market. We all know that the market is virtually dead. And we, like many others, had gone down the road of building a presentation center, getting away from a model home. And one of the things that we heard along the way when meeting with buyers was they really wanted to see, touch, feel. They wanted that model home back that they could walk through. So we pivoted early on to committing to build a couple model homes in our site, and in particular, put up one that was a net zero home. Our homes as a standard are at least 30% better than code. Often our homes are reaching 40% better than code. So it's not a far leap to actually make that next step to net zero. So we had already committed to that when this opportunity came up, and it was a no-brainer that while the market is slow, we have the time, we have the resources to take that deeper dive and see what can we do in a cost-effective manner to bring resiliency into our homes. Because as it was alluded to in the first session, severe storms are happening more frequently and they're impacting more and more people. And when that starts to happen, there starts to be a slight change in narrative, and people start to think of how this will impact their lives. So take the example of out in Calgary with that hailstorm. I guarantee most of those homeowners are now thinking of hail resiliency because it's affecting them in their day-to-day lives. So we committed to bringing resiliency on to our project in Bowmanville. So this is the site. It's our Timber Trails community out on the eastern edge of Clarington and Bowmanville. It's a very large project with about 800 units. And unfortunately, we're starting that project in the worst of times, but it gives us the time to, as I said, make those decisions now that we can hopefully implement into all our homes. So this is the home that we are going to be putting up this year. It is a 33-foot lot, single-family detached home of about 2,500 square feet, something that you would see very typical on any of our projects and across the industry. The one unique thing about this is because we had already gone down the road of committing to a net zero home, we had already chosen an elevation that worked best for energy efficiency and for solar, and it just so happens that that also is the best elevation for resiliency. It is a almost entirely brick clad with just a little bit of soft siding, but that soft siding is a aluminum longboard siding, has a low slope roof. So there's a lot of resiliency items that we can achieve with this home that we may not be able to with all the rest of our elevations. So it becomes a great opportunity that we take the approach of let's deal with the easiest first. Let's see what is really realistic. What can we achieve today? And then start taking a deeper dive into those more complicated items after this home is built. So we committed to looking at three aspects for this home: wind resiliency, flood, and hail. Wind is the most complicated, and it's also the most, I'll say, impactful to the home. It doesn't matter if we build a net zero home that's resilient, but if we don't look at the structure top to bottom, if that home blows over in 20 years, 50 years, and has to get rebuilt, then what did we do? It was all for nothing. So some of the things that we're looking at, we're still very early on in the process trying to figure out exactly all items that we want to achieve, but we're looking at hurricane clips or the truss screws on all our trusses. We're looking at our structural insulated sheathing, how we can overlap our floor assemblies top to bottom to get that continuous load path. We're looking at upgrading our shingles, we already have that roof underlay as a standard. So this becomes a simple product change that we can implement that hopefully then makes that impact. This starts though from design. So we're fortunate in that the home is not built. This is not a retrofit. We can make some slight changes along the way to the design. But the one key aspect is we want the home to resemble every other home in the community. We don't want this to stand out. We want this to blend in, and we want this to be part of the community. So how can we integrate these things across the board without making huge impact to design? The next item is flood resiliency measures. This is something that typically can be achieved through the community itself, through master site grading, but there's little things that can be done on an individual lot basis, and these are simple items that are mainly products. Most homes will have a sump pump, so putting in a sump pump that has a battery backup, putting a sewer backflow preventer on the main sewer line, making sure that any windows have good drainage, large window wells, that you have good sloping away from the home. These are all things that can be achieved fairly cost effectively. The last item is hail. This is something that doesn't impact the Southern Ontario area like it does Calgary, but it can still make a huge impact. Take, for example, this past week, there was some thunderstorms and hail out towards the Kitchener, Waterloo, London area. Not extremely large hail, but these storms are becoming more powerful, more frequent, and this may be something that we have to look to in greater depth in the future. But as I alluded to, it just so happens that this elevation has resiliency items built in just because of the architectural type. It has that brick cladding, aluminum longboard siding. This can be achieved with a shingle upgrade. We have our underlay already there. So we're already checking a lot of the boxes, but there's still more that we could do.
Okay, so Kevin has sort of outlined what they're building, some of the decisions they have to consider. I'm going to make this comment out to all the manufacturers and service professionals in the room. Builders are going to be looking for building solutions, right? They're going to be looking for solutions for some of these issues. And you have an active role to play in bringing forward those solutions. I mean, the Innovation Gauntlet today is an example of that, right? Talking about indoor air quality and what that means. It's the same conversation across the board and all the others. So, having said all that, builders being practical people, looking for practical solutions, recognizing their marketplace, looking for the strategic competitive advantage, the market advantage. They're also looking for help and support, right? So this conversation doesn't start on the back of a napkin. It starts with a great deal of work that was already led by the National Association CHBA, the Resiliency Task Force, and the good work of ICLR, who've really stepped in with a new approach, right? An approach of piloting, partnerships, testing, and then seeing what actually the builder community is interested in doing, because we all know this. As builders, you're making the first decision for that consumer, right? You're deciding ahead of time the windows, the packages, those decisions you're making ahead of time. So that's key to it. So this is an opportunity for us to talk to Ron and Sonia about the work they've been doing to build out this resiliency framework, and tell us about sort of how they got to the checklist, the partnership, and what it means for the industry as a whole. So let me turn it over to them.
Great. Thank you so much. And I think I have a slide. Not sure if it's automatically coming up or... Okay, I'll get going while that started. So I'd like to introduce the Resilient Homes Task Force. Ron and I are both here to speak on behalf of our respective organizations, so I'm here for CHBA. And we're really excited about this initiative because it started just a bit over 2 years ago when ICLR approached CHBA and said that they wanted to work with us. And it was an interesting invitation, and it took us a little bit to wrap our heads around it, but very quickly we saw the opportunity around, yes, exactly, this one, thank you. It took us a little bit to wrap our heads around it, but ultimately it has become an extremely valuable partnership between the two organizations. So ICLR had already, I think, had 15 or 20 years of background in this space, and they were working with other organizations such as Fire Smart and a couple others. I know that Stephanie already had spoken to a few of those. And what is unique about this partnership, it's the first time ever where the insurers and the home building industry has collaborated together to build something that works for both organizations or for both industries. And so as you can see through this Venn diagram here, what ICLR brings to the table and what CHBA brings to the table. And so we just dropped up a 2-year agreement where we spent the first 2 years really focused on the checklists. And I know Ron's going to go a little bit more into some more detail on that, but what we're excited about now is that we're just launching into a new 5-year agreement. And as you can see here, these are some of the things that have already been brought up in the last session, where in the next 5 years, we're going to be focused on doing more builder trials, and we're also bringing renovators in. We've had our very first conversation with renovators at the end of January. We had a little dinner working meeting with them to find out what their thoughts were on the checklists that have currently been developed for builders. And so they did make some recommended changes, and so we're going to be working on that as well. And soon we're going to be announcing a funding opportunity. So NRC has come to the table to fund doing 4 resilient home field trials. So we're going to be looking for some renovators to help us with this. We're also going to be, of course, giving recognition to the guidelines that were developed in the first 2 years and getting those out to market. So that's where the next point comes in, which is about the industry education and engagement. So we did talk about how do we get this information out to people to understand why we're doing it, but also how to do it. So these good, better, best checklists are absolutely a great starting point for us, and it was very valuable for our members to be able to give ICLR feedback on what was actually buildable, what was affordable, and what is likely going to work based on what we've seen on the ground to date. And if Michelle, I don't know if Michelle is still here, but she could have just as easily been on this panel as well. We're also going to be starting some consumer education and engagement. It's really important, again, like we talked about. I was really excited to hear in the last session, can we get the insurance discussion happening earlier on in the stage? And what kind of educational materials could a builder or renovator use when they are working with their home buyers and their homeowners to have that conversation at the design stage versus at the end? So that'll be something exciting we can bring to this conversation as well. Government relations, of course, as always, is part of it. NRCan and NRC are already engaged in this work, as is the LEAP team that Steph's working with. And then one thing that we recognized in the first 2 years is that we also need to be doing insurer field trials, because they also are learning through this process. So there's a lot of great work that we're going to be embarking upon over the next 5 years. And if you're interested, please come chat with me afterwards. No, sorry, I was doing 2 slides. I couldn't remember how we mixed it. We're interchanging. So one of the things that we did as we put the checklist together is ICLR had already done a bunch of work. So here you can see just a list of other field trials they've done. They've also engaged other partners, like I mentioned, NRC, SEC, TDI. The cooperators was a really big one. Aviva's been at the table. The part that CHBA really brought to the table is when we did surveys. And then there was some other work that we did in addition to the surveys, but we did 7 surveys across November to 2024 to August 2025. We had a total of 151 builders responding. And this matrix you see here was really critical for us to have the builders score every single item on the checklist to see how likely it was that they were going to implement it, but also the effectiveness of it. And so that allowed us to better decide which of the items, which of the measures should go in the good, the better, or the best checklist. And then on top of that, in addition to the field trial that's already happening, we are in the process of doing 3 other field trials. So Avalon Master Builder in Calgary is doing one on hail and wind. We have Big Block doing one on wildfire in Fernie, BC, and then the Empire Communities that Andrew, who is here today, is working on as well, and he's doing 3. He's doing wind, basement, flooding, and hail. So the feedback that we were able to provide in the surveys, but also what we are learning through these field trials is really critical. And I think this was brought up by Andy in the last session, is when we're learning about what works and how we can implement them, is the material available? Is it easy for the builders to actually put it together? Is it even easy for them to sell it? Like, these are all very critical pieces that we need to learn. And I'll have to say, Big Block Construction, where they're at, they've also already gone out to their legal counsel to ask about what language can they use without potentially putting themselves in a legal situation. And so even figuring out the sales language has been part of the process. And so when we're learning these things, we will be making sure to include it in the information and the education that we're going to be disseminating to the builders. So now on to you.
Thank you, Sonia. Before I talk about the checklist and sort of the general approach that we're taking, I did want to mention, so it's been brought up a lot, we're talking a lot about affordability, and someone said that a home that is not resilient is not affordable. And I think that's something that's very key for us to think about. If you're handing the keys to a home over to a buyer that, yes, they can afford up front, but it's a burden in terms of the ongoing maintenance costs, the repair costs, and so forth, and potentially, obviously the insurance costs, potentially health costs. There are lots of things that come after the initial upfront spend, and I think we need to think about that as part of what is affordable in a real way. So this is, I'm not going to get into the specifics of the checklist itself, but this is sort of the general approach that we're taking. And it's really about decision making. So you have a bunch of information in front of you. What are the components you're going to put into the home? As Kevin talked about, what type of roofing system, what type of exterior cladding system, your windows, and so on and so forth, your HVAC system, all of those things. So how do you prioritize those? How do you think about what is going to be impactful to this goal of being more resilient? And so the approach here is you can categorize those things into good, better, and best. Under the good, I'll just read through a couple of these. We're talking about things that are low risk and are not challenging to achieve, and in some cases are incentivized by insurers. So fairly simple, not complex, fairly cost effective. The better approach would be where you're talking about going a little bit beyond basics. You're getting into some more research-based solutions and not necessarily field tested or proven, but you're willing to go a step further. And there may be some more cost or complexity involved. And then if you want to go the best approach, you're looking at full adherence to comprehensive guidelines, where those guidelines exist, because for some of the hazards that are being addressed, there are no guidelines yet. And this is, talking about addressing extreme weather events. We call them extreme weather events, but as we're seeing, they're happening more and more, and they're becoming more and more extreme. So I'm not sure what that means. So this is the website here where you can find this information. So it's not just checklists, and these are the 4 sort of main hazards that ICLR is addressing. This is by no means a full list of things we want to talk about when we're talking about resilience or when we're talking about climate hazards. There's much more than this. These, I believe, are what are driving insurance losses, so that's partly why we're addressing them, and we do have some concrete measures that we can take, concrete steps that we can take to address these. So this is sort of well-researched. You can go to these lists and you can get some information that you can apply, but it isn't everything. And finally, I want to, Kevin alluded to this, others have as well, including Sonia. This is not about, here's a set of standards, go and do them. The value of this process to ICLR, and I think to everyone, is that this information is not just going in one direction. We have these checklists as a result of a lot of back and forth that has already happened, and we want to continue that. We want to understand what the challenges are. We want to understand, you're calling this a good approach, but maybe it's better. You're calling this a best approach, but it doesn't belong in that category. All these sort of comments, all that sort of feedback is fair and valid, and we really want to get to, this is constantly evolving, and we want to get to something that is actually, of use in the real world and goes beyond a lot of the work that ICLR has done in the past, which has been largely academic research that sort of sits somewhere that no one's really looking at.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Isaac. I've got one more
One
slide.
more to go? Keep going.
Thanks. So as Isaac already alluded to, we know that there's much more when it comes to resilience, and it was really interesting when we met with the renovators and we asked them, what are your clients asking for when it comes to resilience? And their answer was actually more along the lines of, well, when there's a grid outage, they want to be able to, if there's, for example, a senior in the home that's on oxygen, they want to be able to keep the oxygen flowing. Or where I live in the rural area, there's a lot of hunters. They've got big fridges in their garages full of meat that, they were hunting and they want it to last for a while. They don't want that to go bad. That's a lot of, waste. So there's other reasons, including in wildfire-prone zones. A lot of people are saying, if there's a wildfire, I want to be able to shelter in place. And so I need to be able to filter that smoke out from coming into my home. And so what we're asking now is, okay, so between the climate risks that we've already talked about and the business risks, so whether it's a risk of needing to rebuild or just generally, what are the risks for you as a builder to be not building or to be building these homes? There's risks that you got to navigate either way, pros and cons both ways. And so Isaac did also address, we don't want to further erode housing affordability. And we've talked about this is a great time in the market for everyone to upskill. So these are all things that you as builders do need to navigate, but our goal is to figure out how can we make that job easier for you by providing you with information to be able to navigate that better. So there's a lot of efforts already underway in addition to the ICLR Resilient Homes Task Force with CHBA. So for example, with CHBA, we have an NRCan funded project through the CAF funding. It's one of the things we're doing in there is we have an emissions and resilience working group. And so in addition to leveraging the Resilient Homes Task Force outputs, we're also working on the operational and embodied GHG emissions. We're developing a scorecard for the industry so that they can start to get an understanding of what are the operational emissions in our net zero homes and what are the embodied emissions in our homes. And so the next step is, okay, well, now that we're adding resilience, because we also did talk about we don't want to be doing these things in silos. We have to understand how all of these things in a very holistic way ends up impacting your business processes, your costs, everything. And so these are all things that, again, I think it was Stephanie that might have said that there's, it takes years for us as an industry to work on these things before the mass market industry even knows this stuff is happening. And that's what's going on right now with this specific group. And then for those of you who are also familiar with it, the Net Zero Home Labeling Program. So here are some things that we have addressed somewhat and are now also in our version 2 taking a look at. With grid outages, we already have PV as an option to get from net zero ready to net zero. And if you want to have more grid resilience, I know that there are some builders who are also talking to homeowners who want it on how to add batteries so that they have that resilience. We know some people also have backup generators as well. I know Will Beardmore is here. He can talk to you more about the batteries. He's a guru on that. So there's definitely ways for us to address that piece through a well-built home such as a net zero home. Wildfire smoke coming into the home as well. We have, of course, when you've got an airtight home, that means there's less opportunity for smoke to come in through cracks and gaps in the house anywhere. So you're building a really nice, strong envelope. And then we've also got now an indoor air quality checklist that allows you to choose, depending on the homeowner's desire, you can choose higher levels of filtration up to and including HEPA and others. And so these are ways that you can already start to address some core resilience issues with your home buyers is already through the net zero labeling program. And we've had a great talk with Joe about how if there was a resilience label that we'd want to make sure that it's complementary to what we're doing with the net zero program. So those are some things that are happening today, and we want to make sure that it's all being done jointly in consideration of the other. So I think that's it for me.
Okay, thank you. So you can see there's a natural connection between energy efficiency, high-performance homes, resiliency. There's lots of crossover moments there that get you onto the good list very quickly. Sonia, of course, speaks about net zero. Energy Star puts you in the same position, right? If you're an Energy Star builder, you're already on the path to the better standard. Because you're already building to a higher standard, it's a tighter home, you're already considering these things. So if you're in this room, you're already part of that program in some way. So this becomes an opportunity. And the question around labeling and training comes forward. And we're working our way towards that, right? And that's why we do these pilots. But I want to go and talk about the magic of how all this comes together, right? And, the inequality magic is connecting our network to EAs to bridge energy efficiency, high performance into resiliency. And that's where Toby comes in, right? To lead an IDP process, to be someone who sits in the middle of that and can quickly identify those pieces. And then beyond that, identify suppliers, manufacturers, equipment, building techniques that really complement each other. Because look, we know if you tell a builder, you must build it this way, that builder will show you the door. You're not going to tell a builder how to build something. But what you can do is you can engage a builder and give them options. And through the IDP, they find the option that works best for them, right? We are in the middle of one of the greatest change management moments in the industry. Change the way we think, change the way we build, change the way we treat consumers. And the one thing that I will run through for the entire day is expectations are evolving across the board. And builder expectations of their suppliers and trades are evolving. And that's kind of where we find ourselves. So, speaking about the magic of how an IDP works, how do you get a builder on board? How do you present those options? Turn over to Toby. Go ahead.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate that. And thank you very much to Enter Quality for inviting me here. I am a registered energy advisor, also a master energy advisor with the Association of Canadian Energy Advisors. And I wanted to talk today about how energy advisors can help with this process. And it's sort of a twofold role that we play. As Joe mentioned, energy advisors have lots of expertise in energy efficiency, different programs like CHBA Net Zero, Energy Star, and then the efficiency features of a home. So the insulation, the mechanical systems, and other components. Of course, the building science is a big part of what EAs offer as well, expertise in building science, which is works very well with IDP, integrated design, because we're thinking about the whole house as a system. The internal environment, the occupants, the external environment, the water, the sun, how all that works together. So really, it's a good fit for EAs. The other part is facilitating. An IDP, integrated design process, does require a facilitator. It can sometimes be the energy advisors, sometimes it's separate, and there are a lot of EAs that have that expertise, which is nice. And IDP, I don't want people to get too, it doesn't have to be a complicated process. It's really just getting everybody together, discussing the project, collaborating, making sure everyone's voice is heard, and then making some decisions. So we have all the experts in the room. In this case, we facilitated an IDP with Farsight. We had some representatives from ICLR there. We had Enter Quality. It was quite a large group. You can see a picture here of the session, as well as there's more coming up. But the key is to have everyone there and make sure that people's voices are being heard. It's also very important to have the people implementing some of these things, so the builder, but even the trades as well. So someone that is installing the HVAC system or going to be doing the air barrier. They need to understand why we're doing this as well. So a little bit about how resiliency works with IDP. And one of the main benefits is less of a linear design process and more integrated, more collaborative. So instead of one group doing this and then passing it over to the other one and then passing it to the third one, everyone's in the room, everyone's talking about it up front, they have a chance to get their opinion heard, and then decisions can be made. There's a big benefit, which is, obviously or maybe not so obviously, making a decision or a change in the design early on is going to be much more cost effective than after the product's built or at a later stage. So we can get a lot of efficiencies there. So there's cost implications, timeline management, if you can make changes earlier on as well, or you're implementing new things like resiliency measures, you can avoid those delays that happen. It's really a natural fit. We're seeing that over the years, energy efficiency has been mentioned already. It's kind of been figured out already. Us as EAs and many in the field, we know what makes an energy efficient home. We know how far we can take that. There's a point where it's not cost effective anymore to do it. But these kind of things, embodied carbon, operational carbon, and resiliency are a natural fit to kind of taking that design to the next level, even higher performance design. And this was shown by Kevin a little bit already, but within this session, they broke into 3 groups, and each of the groups had the ICLR checklists for the 3 measures. They were scoring them, and then they went back and came up with things that they were already doing, Farsight, which is great. They're already doing these things in home, so we can achieve that quite easily. And then they also looked at things they could add into this discovery home. So Kevin already mentioned quite a few of these. These were what they called the no-brainers. They're already doing it. The full underlayment on the roof, higher performance shingles installed in warmer temperatures, longer fasteners on the roof decking, and higher wind resistance wall claddings like brick, and a enhanced post base cap connections on porches and other roofs. On the flooding side, they looked at flooding maps and made sure they weren't building in a flood-prone region, did proper grading, no connection to sanitary sewers, and these backflow preventers, pretty easy thing to do, and a lot of municipalities are actually incenting this in some cases. I'm not sure about new construction, but in retrofits, they will help you pay for the cost of implementing that. Yeah, so that's about all I wanted to talk about. There are some more pictures of the IDP here, and I hope Joe has some good questions for us.
I hope so too. So let me share some observations from the IDP from my perspective. A couple of funny moments I found. Rick Chickadance is there, an engineer as well. And so Rick, as a founding member of the company, listening to all these conversations, you would expect that let's say the veteran in the room, as you're working through these issues, would always be going back to the cost implications. And Rick took a whole different approach. He listened, and he said, yeah, we could do that. That's just a change of sequencing. Yeah, we could probably do that. That's just a couple more nails here and there. And that was his approach, open, listening, understanding that now's the time to retool. What can we do? What does this process offer us? And that's interesting, because when you think about change management like this, you would think that the veterans in the room would be the first ones to push back on cost. And he looked at it from a different way, because as a practical builder, someone understands what he's built. He was a framer too for a long time, along with Bob Sugar-Nance. So a lot of framers in the room today. That was his approach, and that was interesting, because that gave his team the courage to think, okay, let's break these things down. Is it really that much harder to change the nailing patterns, to put in longer screws, put in longer nails? If there's a benefit for it, let's think about it. That was interesting. Interesting to watch the sales team in the room, thinking about how do they upsell this to their consumers? What is their marketing advantage? What are the words in the language? We had some insurance folks in the room, started validating as we went along. And it was great to watch the builder group challenge the insurers with, well, what are you giving me back? Are you paying for the hurricane straps and features? What are you offering back? How do you help me communicate the benefit to the homeowner? Will there be an insurance sheet at the end? If I build it this way, is there an insurance sheet that you stand behind the fact that these are resilient features that go into your waivers and your riders for your insurance? So all these conversations talk about the design now evolve into a bigger conversation. And then the last one being challenge out to the manufacturers, right? What are the solutions we need? What does exterior sheathing look like in this environment, right? All these interesting pieces come together in an IDP process when you put everybody in the room and everyone brings a little bit something different to talk about how do you move the project forward. I thought there was some real magic in that room. And we have the video and the sheets to prove it. So with that energy then, we get to where we are today, right? A pilot with a committed builder, moving things forward. So let me start with, back to Kevin and the builder, right? Because everything starts with the builder. You've got these options, you've taken them in-house now. Let me ask, internally, has there been any new friction caused? What's your mindset around this? How excited is the team? And you haven't made all your decisions yet, but what's the next step in sort of making those decisions? And what are the professionals you're gonna lean on before you make sort of those final decisions for design?
So it's a great question, and in the office, we always kind of refer to it as value engineering. How can we deliver the most value to our customers with the least impact to the overall cost? And that goes back to the decision years ago to put that synthetic roof underlay onto the roof. It was that low-hanging fruit that was talked about earlier, that it's a simple product installation, it's not a huge cost, but it can make a real impact to us as the builder, but also to that end buyer, that they have peace of mind in the event of a storm, they have that plane of protection under their roof. So when we start looking at everything for wind, flooding, hail, we start to look at what are the low-hanging fruit that we can easily achieve by just a product selection. What is something else that we can achieve just by a simple process change that's easy to implement? We start to look at what are the ways that we can achieve multiple items with a singular process or product change? And what can we really bring of peace of mind to a buyer? And whenever we get on the topic of resiliency, as it was alluded to earlier, we are experiencing more severe storms more frequently, and I always bring up that it was this time last year that we had the ice storm that impacted southern Ontario. And for me, it impacted me. I was without power for several days, to the point where I was in my basement bailing water out of my sump pump by hand because I didn't have a battery backup. And I sure wished at that point I had a battery backup. So that is something that we can easily implement into a home that will bring peace of mind to a buyer, that in the event of a storm, they have that protection. Because more and more people are being impacted by these storms. So while up front they may not say they're willing to pay for it, if you really get into the conversation with them and explain how this will impact their life, you start to realize that it's not just the dollars and cents, that it's the emotional aspect. How does this impact their life? How does this impact your family? And would you be willing to pay for this for that peace of mind and protection in the event something can go wrong? When we really start to look at things through the lens of the emotional aspect, it starts to lend credence to more availability to put features into the home that buyers may gravitate towards.
Okay. So Ron, let me ask you the question, right? ICLR is in the room. We have a very engaged builder, with some engaged builder folks in the room. Any surprises that came out of that room for you that kind of, both good and bad in terms of what you heard from the builder side of the conversation?
It wasn't, overall, I think generally not a surprise, but the level of engagement of, some of the people that you mentioned, so the sales people, because, to their credit, Farsight had a huge team of folks there, and there were people from all sides of the business. So I think that's really valuable. It's really great to have not just sort of a one-sided or one department, but to have everyone throughout all levels of the organization. But I would say the sort of skin in the game, right? So for each of these people, the sales people, the sales team, and the construction team, and it wasn't something that they were looking at and saying, I don't see how this applies to me. I don't think it's relevant. They were there to be part of the conversation, and they were really very much engaged, and that really contributed a lot to the session. So I suppose generally I should expect that, but the level of enthusiasm was a little bit of a surprise, a good surprise.
Look, I mean, we really beat up on ICLR before we got into that room, inequality, to make sure the room was set properly, right? This is not an academic exercise. This cannot simply be, well, you should build it this way for the safety of the homeowners. That approach with the building community never works, right? In my experience, it never works. So we set that room up to be a conversation where things could be challenged. They were challenged, they were talked out. I think it really helped the room. So I'm saying this for the benefit of all the building room here. Like, if you find yourself interested in this process, the IDP is set up for you to be in complete control of the decisions you make, right? And that's a great thing for ICLR to see as well, because it helps them refine what they think is reasonable in this environment, right?
If I can add a little bit to that. I
Sure.
mean, in this process, and in any system and process, there are going to be competing interests. So I think it's very important for builders going into that process to clearly define what their expectations are, what they want to get out of it, what is key and important for them. Because if you don't do that, you may be finding yourself at the end of the process and you're not really sure, and I've experienced this personally, you're not really sure what you got out of it. But that's because you didn't set out with a clear goal. So all that is to say, ICLR, the insurer, government may have slightly different take on this topic and what they want to see achieved, but as a builder going into this process, you want to make it matter for you and for your organization.
Right. And Ron comes, of course, with a lens, having spent time in the builder side of the equation, having a good sense of what the vibe would be from a builder, how you approach it, how you frame it, what controls you put in place, right? And that's extremely valuable. Toby, let me ask you this question. Energy advisors, are they the right profession to be involved in a resiliency training, labeling opportunity, expertise?
I would say yes, mainly because it's really in line with a lot of their expertise already. They're technical, analytical, they like to learn new things. And I think a lot of this, not a lot, but some of this information is new, right? In terms of digging down into what exactly do we need to do for high wind resistance in a home. Some of it's obvious, but some of it is more technical. I think they're a great partner for that, yeah, because they have that good basis of knowledge. I also want to say just a thank you for some of these tools that ICLR, CHBA, and NRCan's working on, because that's very helpful as well. The EAs are not out on their own, researching everything. A lot of the information's there, including some diagrams and things like that. So,
Can I?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, in addition to that, I think the sound building science principles and approach that the energy advisors bring to the table is, again, critical for making sure it's all going to work the way it should.
Okay, so Kevin, I'm gonna ask you this question. Your trades, your contractors, people on the site, people you trust to actually put this all together. Are they ready for this change? Have you thought about how you get them into this mode of thinking and the training around that?
That's a complicated answer, and it's both yes and no. For us, we have the luxury, if you want to call it that, we've had a very good trade base for a long time. We've built those relationships, and our trades have stood by us, and we've stood by them. But we are getting into a point where a lot of them are retiring, getting out of the business, so we're getting into new trades, new relationships, and we're having to, try to educate them, try to get them on board with the Fire State story, why we do things, how we do things. And that's where it becomes complicated, because at the end of the day, everyone is a business, everyone is there to make a dollar, but it takes a certain trade to be willing to come to these events, to sit down, to try to understand the why, to buy into what this Fire Site story is and how we are going to approach things. So it does become a tricky situation, because there's a lot of hand-holding and education up front, and that's what it all comes back to, is having those early conversations, getting people in the room around the table to collaborate. Homes are extremely complicated, and they're only getting more complicated to build, so having those conversations earlier on is vital.
What's interesting is that when you think about energy efficiency, the Energy Star programs, all these programs, there was that moment early on where there was a skilled trades transition, right? We moved to advanced framing, understanding how to put on the tie back, who's responsible, all those pieces. And I was benefiting because I sort of lived through that transition in my father's framing company in the 90s. The arguments with the bricklayers about who's responsible for the tie back, who's responsible for the tuck tape, all those things. So I remember that. And we're sort of there as well in this resiliency piece, right? It's going to be that same learning, but many of the buildings have already been through that, right? And you should have trades that are interested in advanced skills and learning as part of their natural retooling. So I think when you think about what's already in place, you hope it will be easier. As was mentioned earlier, there's an opportunity in this crisis for people to rethink what they're doing and skill up. So I think there's something there. That's a great way of looking at it. I'm going to ask one last question. The one that keeps me interested in this topic. Is resiliency cost center, risk mitigation tool, or a market advantage? I'm going to go with Kevin last, because he's the builder in the room. Sonia, you're first from the National Association. You've invested a lot of time and energy in this. What are your thoughts?
Well, CHBA is very focused, laser focused on affordability right now. And for those of you who aren't aware, our CEO sent a letter to the Prime Minister asking to pause the building codes because of all of the stuff that we are now being asked to do. So affordability is really a challenge. But I would say probably when we're talking about those areas that are being hardest hit, that have the highest risks, if you're in a wildfire zone, if you're experiencing flooding, to me it's risk mitigation. I think, from a resilience standpoint, even from a GHG emission standpoint, the one that's the most expensive to build is the one you have to build twice. So if it gets blown down, if it gets damaged beyond repair, you want to try and prevent that.
Okay. Toby, let's go to you next.
I think I would agree with that. It's risk mitigation. Coming from my EA and engineering background, it just seems to make sense to me, much like energy efficiency. If you can do something up front to save money or other reasons down the road, then why wouldn't you do it?
Okay. Yeah. Ron.
Well, I'm only going to say that it is risk mitigation. I'm not going to say anything else. I can't sitting here. But it's also, it overlaps, so resiliency overlaps with, and we've been talking about this all day, right? So it overlaps with carbon efficiency, because when you're adding material to a build, you're potentially adding carbon. So a brick exterior brick material, even though it is resilient in terms of its resistance to hail and wind and fire, it is adding carbon. And so if we built every home out of brick, we're doing something on the we're not doing something right. So that's not the only way to address the problem. I'll leave it there.
So I think that's interesting, because that goes back to the manufacturers, right? There's opportunities coming to think about how we respond, right? So whether exterior sheathing or whatever, these things are coming forward. So Kevin, as the builder, last word on this. Resiliency, is it a cost center, risk mitigation, or a market advantage? And then Farsight's commitment to this project, what it means long-term for the future of the way that Farsight plans to build.
I would definitely agree with risk. As I kind of alluded to, it's not only trying to mitigate that risk for the end buyer, but there's risk for us as a builder along the way. And we have to warranty that home. So if there's things that we can do in a cost-effective manner that can mitigate risk or warranty issues for us as a builder, that also bring that peace of mind for the homeowner, those are things that are valuable that then can be used as a marketing advantage. And we've talked about expectations a lot, but it's funny how expectations are evolving except for at the end user. Their expectations for the inside, their features and finishes are always changing, but every buyer instinctively expects that their lights are going to turn on, their toilet's going to flush, their basement's not going to flood, their shingles aren't going to blow off. Those are things that are just inherently expected. So if you don't manage those expectations, your end buyer is not going to be happy. So what can we do in a cost-effective manner to mitigate those risks and manage those expectations? So for Farsight, we have taken that approach to always look to be better than code, look to the future at what's coming down the pipeline, be it code-wise or severe storm-wise. What can we do to enhance our build that sets us apart? We are a small family builder that really prides ourselves on building homes for families, and we want those repeat buyers. So let's take the approach of always looking to the future to make sure that we are always one step ahead.